All right, mine has started. Are we going to try to do the clap thing?
Give me 1 second. Let me trying to fix my volume on my headphones. Okay, that should be good.
All right, you ready?
Yep.
We're gonna 1, 2, 3, clap. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Huge delay there.
Yeah, I think I clap faster. Try it again. Come on, we got to get this down.
We should count at the same time.
Yeah. Okay.
1, 2, 3.
3. See, I think you're trying to wait till I move, and that little bit of delay makes it weird.
It's funny because on mine, you're going second.
Oh, that's nuts. Yeah, you're going second. I'm like, all right, go. And
right. That's what I'm thinking too.
That's nuts.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, I guess there is some weird amount of lag.
Whatever. I guess that's close enough. Hopefully, we don't need it. Like I said, I went well last week, and I'm hoping we can just do that again because that was really nice and easy. All right. So we got an email from Selena. We got a Twitter message from a guy. We got some questions in an email. I think the questions in the email should probably go last, though. If we're going to touch any of them, that should be like after the main topic, I think. Especially because the Facebook post is going to take up some time already as it is. Just because.
Okay.
It's so
what was
long.
the Facebook post? Which one was that?
That was the one. It was kind of about the topic from last week, about the recap, and it just had all that stuff on it. I tagged you in it yesterday, I think.
Yeah, I was gonna say I remember reading some of it too the other day.
Yeah, it was all about tagging the speakers online, and shouldn't take too long, but there was some interesting stuff. Couple interesting things in there. Maybe there really wasn't anything all that interesting, but just I think it's good to acknowledge at least when people say something. I don't know. If I was listening to something and they acknowledged me, I'd feel cool about it.
Yeah, right. Oh yeah, no, I like that too.
Not that anybody's listening, but if they do and they hear their name, they might listen again.
Huh. No. Was that in the Be More Recovery, your other one? For some reason I'm tagged, but that's okay.
Yeah, I threw your name on the end of the post.
Or it's not in my notif. Oh, because I'm in Jennifer. Never mind. Let me get out of. I forget this is on hers every time that I'm like, I don't see where I'm tagged. All right.
Maybe that won't be as long as I was thinking.
I'm still not finding. Why the hell is it not coming up? In my notifications, that's okay.
I wish there was a way. Is there like a... There's no way to share a link to it. That's the problem.
If I go on that page and then just search for... Shit. There's usually a way to search for something on a page. Let me see.
I mean, I can tag you at the bottom of it. I don't know.
What's dumb is I remember reading it.
Yeah, I just tagged you yesterday or Friday. I can't remember which.
Oh, Facebook sucks. Well, it lists them, but it's not listing them in the date order. It's like,
What, the notifications?
yeah. No, if I go back and look at
Oh, yeah. I hate when it does that. I think there's a way to
search.
change that.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do that, though.
And it was in the Be More recovery, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Ah, fucking, I'm not finding it. Why do you hate me? Facebook decides what I can and can't see. Did you just tag me again?
No.
Oh. Oh, no. No,
Do you want me to?
Shit.
Right.
What's the name of that post? I searched
Like,
by that. Or does it?
so have you seen where people are tagging the speakers of their online meetings on Facebook?
Okay, there we go. That'll work. There we go. Whoops. Okay. Got it.
Got it?
Yep.
Okay. So, I mean, it's just, I saw yesterday, I was like 57 comments. Damn, there's a lot there. But really, most of it is, just back and forth with some people. And a couple of interesting takes on it from some of the guys down the bottom.
If they're recent, they're probably the ones I didn't read.
Nah, I don't think anything's really recent.
Oh, no, they're all from a couple days ago. Yeah, then I probably read all these.
I want to know what it takes to be an admin on this page. These people seem important. No, I know one of them. She's not all that important. Okay. So we'll start. We'll do the email. We'll do the Twitter message, and then we'll pop on this Facebook thing for a second, and then get into the stuff. Sound good?
Okay, sounds good to me.
All right. Oh, a little stretch. Make sure my thing's still recording because it's turned off. Looks like it is. That's good. All right. All right. Welcome back. I'm Jason. I'm a guy in short term stuck in my bed.
And I'm Billy. I'm also a person in long-term quarantine recovery.
I gotta find some new stuff to say there. I'm running out. Welcome back to Recovery, sort of. We wanted to definitely start out this week. We did our episode last week, of course, on whether it was okay to promote people's names, and we got a little bit of recap to do from that. We also got a nice email from Selena, and she talked about being thrown off because she couldn't listen for a little while, and then when she came back, we had a new theme music. So I thought that was kind of funny. It threw her off. It made her think, God was telling her that she had to go back out and run because she was healed. So that was nice. And then we got also another nice message. There's another podcast. It's Brutally Sober. It's interesting. It's just kind of a guy who's, I don't know, agitated, annoyed with life a little bit as he's, progressing in recovery. And it's pretty entertaining due to that fact. But he was asking us what recovery podcasts we like. And of course, when I say us, I do mean me because I was on the one talking to him. But I did want to reach out to you, Billy, because I was like, I don't know. I think we've had this conversation, and I don't really like most of the recovery podcasts that are what you would call, I guess, the bigger name ones, and it's not that I don't like them. I think they're doing a great job. I'm glad they're spreading the message of recovery to a lot of people. I guess they just aren't really my flavor or aren't what I'm looking for when I listen. A lot of them are like interviews of people. And that just didn't do it for me. And so I had the conversation with him and told him, there was a couple I liked, and I mentioned them. Of course, I appreciate the people we interact with on Twitter. I think they're fun, and I like their podcasts, but he already knows all of them. But he paid us a nice compliment and said that he really felt like we were the people he listened to and got the most out of because he enjoyed our type of podcast. And that's not to say that we do it better than anybody else. It's just that he enjoys what we do and the conversations we have. And so I appreciated that.
Yeah, me too. And that's, again, part of wanting to do this was to try to be something different. When I listened to recovery podcasts, it almost felt like, I don't know. I want to say something you could hear in a meeting or something that you could get by, hearing a speaker. And I wasn't looking for an alternative to go into meetings or an alternative to get, information per se. I wanted to do it as like a discussion. Well, let's talk about some of this stuff. Let's see if we can open our minds and explore some of these topics a little more in depth, and not be afraid to sort of, I don't know, be pigeonholed into one fellowship, one point of view, one limited way of looking at things. And I think within our fellowships, it's not necessarily safe to do that, unless you're at someone's house with a friend or, sitting around a campfire or whatever. Within a meeting, you're not going to have some of these discussions that we've had or talk about some of these topics. So those were the kind of topics that I wanted to talk about, were things that might be a little more either controversial or try to have a more open-minded approach to things, or, a broader.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I want to theorize and like you mentioned before, pontificate on these until they're dead, gone. We've dug them back
Right.
up and they're dead again. And that's just not what I've heard in other places so much. There is like a Al-Anon podcast for whatever reason that it struck me as enjoyable that I used to listen to. And I still do from time to time, called The Recovery Show, which, good name for a recovery show.
Yeah.
So to get back to the Facebook post from last week, we did the episode on, people using people's names, maybe their full names, maybe tagging their Facebook, maybe even mentioning what, why they're famous. And
Yeah.
so I did not use that person's name in our show episode title. So I did not use them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe we should have. We could have got some more listens.
I thought about it. So we posted it and we got some other people's opinions. And people were kind of in agreement for the most part, but there was some different takes on it. Caroline, Rachel had mentioned that she was enjoying the speakers, but she missed the celebrity part at first. And once, she realized that was in there, she agreed that seemed a little off. And then Caroline, same thing that we felt like she had seen that kind of post and it just didn't really sit very well with her. And that's kind of, I think, where we were at. It was really less about, is this okay or not, even though that was the discussion, and more about the fact that it just felt so wrong. Barry makes an interesting point. He says, if your concern is anonymity, you give it up when you join social media, as far as I can tell. And he might have a point there. What do you think about that?
Well, and I was just thinking to myself, I would say that I would disagree with that. I don't give up my anonymity by joining social media. You'll see posts on my page about recovery topics or recovery things, but I don't specifically affiliate myself with any fellowship. And, I actively try not to. If I do, it's certainly either an oversight or by mistake. But I personally try very hard to keep my anonymity online. Again, not for my sake. I have no problem sharing about recovery or being in recovery or being a person that, struggles with addiction. It's in respect for the traditions and respect for the fellowship that I try to keep my anonymity. So I don't agree that just because I'm on social media and a person that talks about recovery that I give up my anonymity.
Well, I wonder also, and he's from down near the Baltimore area, and what I have seen happen down that way is people will join Facebook, and there's a lot of newer members down there. And if you don't have your Facebook privacy settings locked down, like I don't know, maybe you don't even realize you can lock them down where you get notified and have to approve when you get tagged in a post or something. Like, people have taken pictures at NA meetings, events, outside of meetings, and just posted them and tagged people. And I think you do open yourself up to being, outed in a sense when you're on social media, more so than if you weren't at all. And maybe, because honestly, I know a guy who's not on social media.
Yeah.
Well, I know a guy who's not on social media who's still in pictures and doesn't get tagged, but everybody knows who the hell he is. And he's still on Facebook community as being the guy who's with us. So.
Right. And who doesn't, remember, I remember being in jail, and over the years I had been court ordered to meetings and stuff. And I had known some people that were in meetings, and I would out them in jail. Oh, I remember that dude. He used to go to those NA meetings, because I didn't know nothing about, and that was before social media. So
right.
When I talk about giving up my anonymity, what I mean is, I can only be responsible for my behavior and my part in things. And, whether I'd go to the extreme of this, if I was tagged in a picture or a post that outed my anonymity, would I go untag myself? Because those are things you can do too. You can untag yourself or whatever. I don't know that I would go to that extreme, but I can only take responsibility for my actions. If someone else does something against me, obviously I can have a conversation with them about it, but you can't, if I'm saying I only ever want to keep my anonymity, then I can't even go to regular meetings, because somebody there is going to see me that's maybe not a regular member, or that's court ordered, or that, is going for whatever reason, that might tell a coworker or a friend that, oh yeah, I saw that dude at the meeting,
Right.
It's.
No, you're right. That could happen.
Just because we're in social media means we have less respect or less expectation of privacy,
That might be an interesting discussion for a day. Is there less expectation of privacy on social media?
Well, again, and through education, it's all new. So as experienced members who have trying to understand and apply some of these principles of anonymity, again, it's not a point of trying to make other people do what we think they should do. It's about education and just being an example of what you should do, talking to people that I sponsor or people that want to talk about it. Hey, maybe you shouldn't be, fucking tagging every NA event on your public page. Like, maybe that's not the best idea. Things like that. We learn by being the experienced members, or the people that have practiced and shared our experience in those areas.
And I think, and so the next comment, Stephen gets into a sort of similar idea, that we are navigating these waters right now and going to use the experience we have and also our new conditions to come up with new experiences. I believe what he's getting at, saying that the social media aspect of this has kind of been bubbling under the surface for quite a while. And he's right about that, I think. Kind of what we were just talking about, people getting tagged in pictures and this, that, and the other. And now with this new, pretty much all online format, it's sort of bubbling up to like, oh, hey, let's figure out these new, traditions or these new ways that we have to operate. he's asking, his first question was, does your definition of a private page on Facebook constitute a promotion or a public announcement? And I think that was kind of what you had mentioned last week about what, NA's statement on the matter was sort of, if it is in a closed group, it's not a public announcement. It's what I think you said, it was like a letter written to someone almost.
Yeah, that's the way that it could be used for that if the security settings were locked down and those kind of things. Yeah. And even in that though, I think they were expressing that more in the idea of, let's say you had you were trying to put on a convention or something and you wanted to have like a Zoom meeting with the participants of the convention committee, that you could secure and lock that stuff down in a way that didn't make those kind of discussions public information. That's kind of what I took away from what we read last week, is like you can have, maybe conduct business meetings or maybe conduct correspondence or group conscience, decisions in a closed format in a lockdown group. That was the way I read that. But
I gotcha. So
I guess if you had a closed Facebook group, I don't know. It would be difficult. You'd almost have to have like guidelines or some policies as an area who would administer the page,
right.
or whether your area has a website that has a discussion board or a Facebook page for your area that controls, who the members are, or it would take a lot more thinking than what I've put into it. That's for sure.
Right. And so I think when we go to the next one, Edward seems a little frustrated with everything. He said, we don't use last names, and the anonymity is supposed to keep us equal. No big shots, no promotion. But with the world doing it, why not? And that's why I asked him. I said, well, what do you mean? Is the world promoting? And he mentioned that's what he feels like. That's what they do. They're supposed to do the group's bidding, but not anymore. And it changed when they changed the name of the committee on cooperation to promotion, and basically ordered the area to do the same without any input from the group. The more they promote, the more literature they can print and sell around the world. I know Edward is not alone in this sentiment or idea that all literature is about money. I actually had a discussion, not a huge discussion, about this fact, because I don't know that I care to discuss it too deeply, but somebody was talking about the new tradition workbook and how good it was. Actually, it was another guy named Jason, and I was telling him that I was sort of in refusal to buy any more literature. Like I could read the literature I already have more, and I don't really need to spend more money. And so I don't know. Edward seemed angry, and I think or at least agitated or not happy with the changes, maybe at our world level. And, I think plenty of people feel that way.
Yeah. And I'm assuming when he says they, because there's always this they and them vagary that people throw around. And sometimes when you ask them, well, who is they, or who are, them, I think he's referring to the World Board. I would assume that's what he's talking about, cranking out literature and trying to sell it. I belong to a few groups that dig into some of that stuff a little bit, and I read it more for entertainment than anything else. I tend to not put a ton of energy into it, for myself, mostly because I feel like, my group meets every week and we have our meeting and we have the steps and we have the traditions and we have the basic texts and we have, the literature, all the literature we ever need for a meeting. And that even if, the World Service closed down next week because they're financially broke, we'd still show up there every week and have our meeting with the literature that we have, and we'd be fine. And I believe that's the way the fellowship was designed. And, I know there's a lot of other controversies of that stuff that I personally just don't have the energy to get caught up into a lot. So
No, absolutely. I'm with you. I kind of, this is almost exactly where I got to the other day when I was having this discussion. It's not so much that I don't care what World Service does, but it's more like what it seems is when they put out this new literature, people seem to get new and fresh insights into their recovery from it, right? So it seems like it's doing a positive in that sense. And if I don't want to buy it, I don't have to buy it. And no matter what World Service does right now, they are not impeding on my ability to show up and help the still suffering addict. Now, if they ever were to do something that held me up from doing that, then I might need to think about starting a new fellowship or taking my
Right.
fellowship back. But it was very much in line with the specialty meetings. It was like, I don't see the harm in new literature. Even if I don't want it, I don't have to buy
Right.
it. It seems like it's doing some good stuff. So I was happy for our podcast. I felt like that led me to a very healthy decision on the matter.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I agree. I think the same thing.
So RJ brought up our online meetings, technically sanctioned NA meetings. And so that started a little discussion. You know, my initial response was, I don't know about sanctioned, but yes, they're NA meetings. Like, you know, I'm pretty sure about that. And then Jason, this is where Jason did chime in and asked what a sanctioned NA meeting was. And I think he brings about a good point. Like, we seem to have this service structure that believes NA meetings are only NA meetings once they get voted into an area. And that's not my understanding. I think a meeting is a meeting, right? Like, it doesn't matter if the area votes it in or not. Maybe it's not in that area if the area doesn't vote it in, but it's still a meeting if people are meeting and following the rules or the guidelines of the traditions, right?
Right. Any meeting can start, and we had talked a little bit about this. There's differences between an NA group and an NA meeting, and digging into what those differences are, how you interpret some of that stuff. But then, yeah, an NA meeting is any. I forget that I'm going to say this generally, but I believe it's in the literature. It talks about a meeting is any gathering of 2 or more addicts,
In the spirit of recovery, right? Something like
right,
that.
based on the 12 steps and 12 traditions. That's a meeting. And
Yeah.
as we're following that 12 steps, 12 traditions, it's a meeting, whether it's on a schedule or listed somewhere publicly or, however it's, I'm going to use the word promoted. However it's promoted doesn't necessarily qualify it as sanctioned.
Right. It's interesting. There was a post a couple weeks back about something real similar. If we could post, what somebody was calling a renegade meeting on our area, and I'm like, it's not a renegade meeting. Like, everyone's welcome. A renegade meeting, I get if you're breaking some of the rules, if you're saying certain people aren't welcome, if you're not following the guidelines, if you're not following certain traditions, sure. But this was just a meeting in somebody's backyard that started because the church closed down, and they were like, "Oh, you can't post that on our website." I'm like, "Why? It's a meeting."
Right.
I don't know.
And to be honest, and I know, in our area, we've had some meetings that don't allow certain people and stuff like that. And to be frank, I might make an argument that they shouldn't be listed on a meeting schedule, but I don't know that I would actively try to shut them down. You know what I mean? Like, I still think they serve a purpose. And if people are showing up there and getting the basic principles of recovery based off the steps and the traditions, then let it happen. I mean, I'm not going to support it, even if I'm allowed to go. I don't know if I'm on the approved list to go or not. I don't know that I would go anyway. But, at the same time, I don't feel like it's my right to go and try to shut them down or close them.
Yeah, I don't think I'm with you. I don't think we need to shut anything down. Like, maybe it's
Right.
not an NA meeting, but it's still a meeting of people trying to have some recovery and do some positive stuff, right? Even if they have some certain rules and regulations that don't allow them to be part of the fellowship or
Right.
part of the program, I don't think they're doing a bad thing.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. So, not to keep us moving along a little bit here. Last one,
Yeah.
I think Ted was coming from a different stance. He was coming from more of an AA side of the street, and he mentioned that's not in line with the traditions. And he said, again, technically anyone claiming AA membership on social media with their actual name and likeness visible is also not following traditions. And then he said, or more specifically, how AA has interpreted traditions as applied to modern technology. And so that got into a really interesting discussion about the spirit of the traditions and a lot of what we talked about last week and breaking anonymity at the public level. And I don't know. I thought it was just super interesting to talk with some people and get some different perspectives. As always, I appreciate everybody's input.
Yeah.
Even when it doesn't change my mind about where I stand, it makes me question where I stand enough that I know I stand there for a reason and not just, because somebody told it to me 10 years ago.
Yeah, and that's one of the great benefits I've gained from recovery. And I still struggle with it at times, but I always felt like I needed to be right and I needed to have all the answers. And if anyone questioned my opinion or the way I thought about things, that was somehow a challenge to, me. And I've, thank God, grown in that area where people can have differences of opinion. We can talk about something and you can see it a different way. And I don't, feel a need to cram my opinion down your throat to make you see it my way. And B, I don't necessarily need to change my opinion or feel wrong because someone else disagrees or sees things a different way. It's a great blessing of recovery, really.
Yeah, it's super cool. It really is. And I remember the first time somebody told me the whole concept of it's more important to understand than to be understood. And I just thought that was such a mind-blowing concept that because my program only talks about me, right? I'm the one that needs to change anything in my life in my program. So I don't need to force other people to understand me. I just need to do my best to understand other people to the best of my ability. Like whether they understand me or not is really none of my goddamn business.
Yeah, and there's a freedom that comes with that. Like I get the freedom now to kind of just say what I feel like I need to say if I'm engaged in those conversations and then walk away and let it go. I don't have to fester it in my head and hang on to it or develop these resentments over some conversation that, turned into an argument. You know, like those things are a great freedom to be able to have.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm with you. So before we get into our topic today, one last final thought. The pandemic going on globally that has everyone stuck at home that I swore would allow everyone to listen to podcasts has actually, it seems, limited podcast listenership. And I can understand why. Like, I thought it would do one thing, and now I'm stuck at home with my kids with not much time to myself to listen to things such as podcasts or audiobooks or anything. So I get it. For me, they are much better listened to while driving or doing a task away from my home. But even with that going on and with listenership down across the board of podcasts, we have hit 2,000 listens, and I just thought I would like to acknowledge that with
Yay.
you. And right, that's cool, And so now we got a text message this week from a friend of ours, Carolyn, and she asked about the clarity statement. So, NA has a clarity statement. AA has a pamphlet, I guess, that is similar, that talks about how they can only help the alcoholic and not the drug addict. And we have a clarity statement. And so she asked about the clarity statement, saying clean and sober, getting speakers from another fellowship to chair a meeting in this fellowship, blurring the lines between fellowships. And so that left us with a topic. And I kind of, at first, I sort of brushed it off slightly because I just didn't feel like it was going to be, I didn't feel like there was much to debate about it. Like in my mind, you can't get a speaker from another fellowship. That doesn't make any sense at all. And so I was like, I don't know what the debate will be. But she apparently just had to leave a home group of hers, that she had forever, because they decided you could do that. And I thought, wow, people really. So, okay, let me get real clear. There's small meetings down where I come from near Baltimore that have like the same 4 people at them every week. Nobody else ever really goes, and they're old time, crossover guys who got clean when you had to do both fellowships because there wasn't enough meetings in either fellowship to make it, or at least there wasn't enough in ours. And so they kind of blur the lines incredibly and do whatever they want. And I've never really cared because nobody else ever goes to the meeting because we all know that that's what that meeting is. It's the blurry lines meeting of NA. But I didn't think this happened all over the place, or that it happened in places where people were, I don't know, more practicing recovery, I guess.
Mm.
So I didn't think it was much of a thing, but apparently it is. And so that's where I think we're at today. The clarity statement, how we feel about the clarity statement, what it really means. I've talked to you about the clarity statement before, and you were not a big fan of it at that point in time. So what's up? Clarity statement. Should we start reading it first, or?
Yeah. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of the clarity statement either. Of course, like most things, I used to be in the beginning. It was like, yeah, it's great. We got to rein people in. We got to, uniformity. All that stuff. We all got to view things from this narrow line if we want to keep it safe and all that. And now I'm sort of the other way. I'm like, who gives a shit what people call themselves? I mean, depending on what part of the country you're in, and I think traveling and life experience has shown me, we've traveled to some areas that are similar to what you're talking about, where there are not enough recovering people to support almost one fellowship, let alone 2. I mean, we spent some time out in Utah, and there were very few AA meetings. There were no other fellowship meetings at all, like none at all. We actually, while we were in that area, started an NA meeting, and to get to any other fellowship meeting was like a 2-hour drive in one direction to get to the closest city, to have, what I would call, sanctioned, AA, NA meeting. So, yeah, it's easy to make some of these glorious claims about how we identify ourselves and what we call ourselves and where our speakers come from when you're in a city with thousands of people and hundreds of meetings. But that is not everyone's experience in this country, let alone in other countries. We're not even talking about other countries where you may have these issues, but just within this country, that's not a reality for some people.
Right. No, I think you make an incredible point that all these arguments that I've had with people near in around Baltimore City, or at least, even Cecil County. We're not a huge area, but we're right between Baltimore and Philly. And so there is a lot of places you could go for meetings if you needed to. It's pretty thriving around here. And I have definitely not gotten the perspective of the person in small town Wisconsin, or, middle of nowhere Wyoming, on this topic. And I imagine their take of what NA or AA or any recovery looks like is much, much different than the, whatever 600 or so meetings the Baltimore area has each week.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Maybe I'll step back a minute and say maybe we should explain or maybe read the clarity statement. But yeah, so within these fellowships, for people that aren't really intimately familiar with the different fellowships, AA came along and they identified, the alcoholic as being a really sort of specific individual that struggles with alcohol, and that they didn't feel like their fellowship at the time and even now is open to drug addicts or people with other addiction issues. And so they really try to keep their focus specifically on alcohol and alcohol addiction. And then so as in NA, they've come up with a similar principle, philosophy, I guess you would call it, that, we are specifically focused around addiction. And even though we want to use and this is where I'll do a little bashing, we want to use the term addiction, but then within our fellowship, we really limit it to drug addiction because we don't want you to come in and talk about a lot of your other addictions. There's a lot of people that feel like that's an outside issue, but we want to capture that word addiction and take ownership of that, but then not really be open to all addicts of all kinds at all times. So that's my little bit of, bashing there. But then we have our clarity statement. Do you have it up, or?
I do, but why don't we
Okay.
take our little break for the voices ad
Okay.
real quick, and then we'll come right back.
Gotcha.
All right, welcome back. And so, yeah, here's the clarity statement that we have somehow come up with. It's mostly taken out of a bulletin, I believe. And it says, we are presented with a dilemma when NA members identify themselves as addicts and alcoholics or talk about living clean and sober. The clarity of the NA message is blurred. To speak in this manner suggests that there are two diseases, that one drug is somehow separate from the rest, requiring special recognition. Narcotics Anonymous makes no distinction between drugs. Our identification as addicts is all-inclusive, which allows us to concentrate on our similarities, not our differences.
Yeah.
So, I mean, look, a lot of times when I've heard this read in a meeting before I've really done a whole lot of looking into it, I do get it. I do get where it would be confusing to say I'm clean and sober, right? That says that I'm two different things, and I could possibly be one and not the other at different points in time. It says that, if I'm an addict and alcoholic, that I two different problems, right? That I could be working on one and not the other. I remember, and I don't know, maybe this truly has happened, maybe it hasn't. I remember early on when I had kind of the NA policeman as my sponsor, he would talk about how people in AA would stop drinking, but they were still snorting coke every weekend or something. Like, I don't even know if that really existed.
I'm pretty sure that's still true, but
but that to me embodies the whole concept of addiction and alcoholism as two separate entities. And if you say I'm an addict, which is all inclusive for all mind and mood altering chemicals, then you're really being redundant. Like, should I say I'd struggle with addiction, alcoholism, cocaine addiction, heroin addiction, marijuana addiction? Like, do I need to list all of them each time? Or I don't know. So it makes sense, I guess, is what I'm getting at. The clarity statement does make sense. That does not make sense to do that, to call yourself those things.
So, just to give a little bit of history of where these bulletins come from, these service bulletins, they come from our World Board of Trustees. It's a letter or whatever bulletin written by them. I have heard, and I don't know how true this is, but the consensus of conversation is that particular statement was indicative of basically one primary member on the board at the time that was written. And that, that is not like fellowship approved literature. It's never been put out for review and input. It's never been put out as a piece of formal literature that's supposed to be available to groups, whether at the level of service or within home groups. So it really is just the opinion of the Board of Trustees at the time. So it is definitely not the expressed conscience of the NA Fellowship. So, whether groups can decide that that's in their conscience, I don't know. That would be.
No, I'm with you.
But
I'm with you. It's like me and you putting out bulletins.
Right. We decided that this is the way we look at this, and we think, and that's what groups do within their thing all the time. So where it comes into relevance for, again, my home group is, is that a violation of any kind of traditions to read it? Is it a violation of any kind of traditions if people identify themselves as addicts and alcoholics? Do we have some responsibility to do anything about that if people do those things? And of course, for me, it all comes back to intention. And I think absolutely not. Like, what do I care what people call themselves? Depending on what area of the country you live in, they call different things they use different language for different things anyway. In some areas of the country, they call it soda. In other areas, they call it pop, and, so words like that, when you get into clean or clean and sober or sober, your understanding or general understanding of that word can be different depending on which geographic area you come from. A bigger argument of mine has to do with a lot of people that come out of treatment centers or that are coming in new into the recovery community. Maybe they've been through treatment through a local health department or a private, rehabilitation center. They aren't very good at explaining to people these little nuancy bullshit things that matter. So, they're in this rehab and they're told they go to these alcohol meetings this day and these drug meetings that day. And, they're told in the, scientific literature, there's a lot of different names for, opioid use disorder. I mean, it's singled out, just in opioids as its own addiction. You might have an issue with gambling. You might have an issue with sex. You might have this, different struggles that you have with addiction. And in treatment centers or jail or, these rehabs, they don't explain all these little dumb nuancy things. So brand new people come out and identify themselves some way and we start telling them they're wrong. It's very off-putting to me.
Yeah. I mean, so I can kind of understand it. So I remember reading, and this was quite a while back, and I don't remember the exact language of any of it, but there's the AA pamphlet that talks about why they can't help us, or they can't help drug addicts per se. And so I was kind of offended when I first read it. I was like, these jerks, they're only worried about themselves, right? Like, of course they're excluding us. All the more reason to hate them. And then I read it and I was like, this pamphlet makes absolute golden logical sense. If you could walk into an AA meeting and refer to yourself as an addict, I'm an addict named Jason, I'm an addict named Billy, and then they don't say anything about it, and that's okay. And then, the next meeting, a couple other people who feel more like addicts than alcoholics start calling themselves that. And then at some point in time in the future, an alcoholic, a guy who's only ever drank alcohol, is going to walk into a meeting of AA and is going to hear a bunch of people refer to themselves as addicts and talk about being clean and talk about, maybe using drugs in ways that aren't drinking alcohol at your local bar. And he's not going to be able to identify, and he's not going to get the help he needs. He's never going to hit another meeting because he didn't hear what he came to hear, which was people like him. And so it made a lot of sense why they say, hey, we're sober here. We're alcoholics only. We can't help other people beyond that. This is our primary purpose. And if we try to help too many people with too much stuff, even though our program probably could, because the 12 steps work for everything, if we were to try to do that, we will lose the member we started to serve. And so I really understood that principle of it, is that, they have a primary purpose, and so do we. And so I get where the clarity statement comes from, that if we start to lose or confuse how we call ourselves, we can confuse the message to some extent.
Yeah, but so that's similar to saying if we have, well, let me back up for a minute.
Okay.
So yes, I think that happens. People identify themselves as addicts and alcoholics, or they talk about just alcohol or whatever. Like, it happens. I have yet to be in a meeting where that is, and I've been to meetings all over the country, including meetings where they only have, very limited meetings. And I've never been in a meeting where everyone talks about is alcohol and identifies themselves as alcoholics. And, it's like we worry so much about this extreme case that our message of Narcotics Anonymous is going to be totally blurred within a meeting, that we don't look at, the potential negative impact of the way that can isolate or exclude people, and I guess what I mean is, as experienced members, I am not going to go into a meeting anywhere ever and identify myself as an addict and alcoholic, or talk about living clean and sober, or any of those things. And it doesn't matter if they read the clarity statement or not. Like, I understand the program of Narcotics Anonymous now that I've been around a while. I have been to areas where they only have AA meetings. When I go to those meetings, so this will get sort of more, I think, into the heart of this discussion. Yeah. So when I have been to AA meetings, because again, we've been in areas where that's the only meetings that they are. Am I not supposed to fucking say anything because I'm not a member of Alcoholics Anonymous? Am I not allowed to share my experience, strength, and hope in my process of 12-step recovery because it's only ever been based on the Narcotics Anonymous program? I mean, I've been in these rooms. So when I have been to meetings, I can tell you I have shared. I can tell you that as much as I understand, to the depth that I understand that language, I try to identify and use the correct verbiage as far as calling myself an alcoholic and talk about being sober. I'm sure I messed it up at times because it's just so foreign to me to identify in a different way. But I try to follow those things. But does that really mean that all my experience with the 12 steps is irrelevant because I don't have experience with that specific fellowship?
And so this is where it gets interesting.
Am I blurring their message? You know,
I don't know. Are you okay? So far, what I've just tried to lay out and get across is that I do understand the logic behind the clarity statement. Like, I do get that we could confuse it. And my argument for why you have never encountered a meeting where they only talked about alcohol is because we have a clarity statement. So they've done their job. No, I don't know.
It's not very big in this area. There are a few meetings that read it, but not a lot.
I guess for me, I just get the point, right? I get the point that it does sound like there's two different problems when our belief is that there is one problem. And so I get why it doesn't make sense. Being in the online community, it's much more freely. They say what the fuck ever. They don't really care for the most part. They're clean and sober, and I will quickly identify as clean and sober and not give a shit because I am both of those things, even if they are separate, which I don't think they are, but I still am, if you want to call them separate. I think it's just kind of catchy to say, honestly. Clean and sober sounds nice.
Right.
Got a ring to it. So I went to an Al-Anon fellowship for a while. So I went to some of their meetings, and I personally love it. I highly identify with a lot of what they talk about. Here's the problem. I don't necessarily have an alcoholic.
Right.
I don't have a qualifying alcoholic. I have some what I would call para-alcoholics, people with all the same characteristics and personality traits and disorders, but not the alcohol. And so I never chose to share at those meetings. As much as I got out of them, I chose to avoid sharing because I sort of questioned, do I qualify to be here to some extent? I don't know. So when I get a speaker for an NA meeting, I expect them to share their experience, strength, and hope in working the NA program. And so even if they worked the 12 steps and had a great understanding and could respect my program's, wording, if they're from a different fellowship, I kind of feel like that they don't have experience working the NA program. They don't have experience to share about how the NA program worked for them. And so that's where I get a little confused. Is that okay? I mean, it's probably a great 12-step message if they've worked the 12 steps, but is it okay because it's not their experience with the program people are attending?
So maybe you would. Well, let me say this question first.
Okay.
We see all the time in meetings where people identify themselves as, I'm a crackhead, my drug of choice was this, when I was using, I used this drug or in that way or whatever. I mean, I guess I would say, what's the difference? Like,
No, so to speak to that, what I didn't realize about this clarity statement, and in reading the bulletin, which is, let me not get it
Yeah, it
wrong here,
says
but
in there
Bulletin
too.
13,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
their purpose wasn't just to
Dope
not
fiend. It
identify
says
as an
don't identify
alcoholic.
as a dope fiend. Yeah.
Right, right. So I think what they're saying is all of these manifestations of referring to ourselves as something other than just addicts. Anytime we make it drug specific, we do blur the message. If you go into a meeting and everybody shares about their heroin use and you smoke crack, you're not going to compare in. Possibly. I mean, you could. It could be a very similar feeling that you can compare into. But early on, I didn't compare so much to the feeling, I don't think. I compared to what I heard, like the message itself. And so I needed to hear similar type stories. Now, granted, the type of addict I was, I guess, almost any story hit some part of my story because I did a whole lot of different things at different points. But yeah, they're saying don't be any specific language. And so for me, this ties into, all inclusive. I don't like when people refer to themselves as anything other than just an addict, right? I've heard I'm a recovering addict, name this. And then,
Yeah.
well, now the
Grateful
newcomers,
recovering addict.
right?
Or,
The
yeah.
grateful recovering addict, the human garbage can, all these different manifestations of introducing ourselves when really, if I got 2 days clean, oh shit, am I as good as him? Am I a recovering addict or am I just an addict? Like we're all supposed to be equal. I'm just an addict named Jason. I'm not a grateful recovering addict. I'm not a human garbage can. I'm not a dope fiend named Jason. I'm just an addict named Jason.
Right.
So yeah, I would agree with your statement. Yes, they all matter. We should just all be addicts.
Okay. And then so what happens for or how would you think of people that maybe go to both fellowships or go to more than one fellowship? Maybe they have sponsors from both fellowships. You know what I mean? We know people. I know people that,
Oh yeah.
I go to 3 different fellowships. I have 3 different sponsors. Are they qualified to share at a meeting? You know?
So yeah, no, I think you're right. I for the longest time I was against the whole go into both fellowships, and when I say both, of course, I mean the big two. I said that's a terrible idea. You want to go and become accountable and recognizable in one. I've definitely changed my opinion on that. You do whatever works for you. I think you get one sponsor. I don't care how many fellowships you're in personally. I think one sponsor is probably what you need to work with. Um, that being said, I had 2 sponsors for a period of time in 2 different fellowships, but I was only working with one at a time, I guess. Um, but yeah, what if you love the AA meetings in your area, but you're an addict, and so you have an NA sponsor and you work NA steps, but you just hit the AA meetings. Like that
Right.
blurs the shit out of the line. What program are you
Right.
working, really? Like what
Yeah,
can you
what
share?
percentage of what you know came from place, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think some of these things we get, too again, drawing these lines and it gets back to a lot of these other discussions we have. Like it's great that we can sort of set I'm gonna call it set a bar, try to set a general standard for things. But but when we try to do this, these are the rules and we're gonna enforce them and we're gonna become the, NA police. Like I think that stuff gets really dangerous. And not necessarily for us, it gets dangerous for, newcomers or pushing people away or really, violating the spirit of what we're doing here. It's that any addict can find recovery here. Does that mean if you're only an alcoholic, you shouldn't come here? No, not at all. Come, please. We want addicts to come and get what they need here. And people that only have a problem with alcohol can come here and find what they need. And to me personally, I don't give a shit what you call yourself. Call yourself whatever you want. Just keep coming. Let me help you. If I become your sponsor, we'll work on that shit. We'll fix it over some time. We'll get it straightened out. But again, that's in this area where we have lots of meetings from different fellowships and lots of options. I mean, when we were out in Utah and it's on Tuesday, you're going to the AA fellowship, and then Wednesday or Thursday, you're going to the NA meeting, and that's all the fucking meetings you're getting to. Um, you know, you couldn't find an NA sponsor. My wife and I were the only NA people that had only NA experience. No one else. They were like, wow, that's amazing. Like, you guys really just got all your recovery in NA. That, out there, that was just totally foreign, and no one even understood how that could happen.
Oh my God, where's this at? I feel like I'll be a king out there.
Yeah, Utah. Yeah, southern Utah.
Moving to Utah.
So there was a lot of blurred lines and a lot of blurred message. And, truthfully, so just to share a little bit about, like, yesterday, I spent the day around the house doing some things. And I started, since we were kind of talking a little bit about this earlier in the week, I started listening to some history stuff, and was listening to Jimmy Kay, who's one of the founding members of Narcotics Anonymous. Started back in 1953, and he was sharing some history and stuff. And so he came out to a world convention. I don't remember exactly what year it was. It was in New York. But he was sharing at the world convention. And as a founder of Narcotics Anonymous, like, he came out and identified himself as an addict and alcoholic at the world convention. And then went on to say that he was a proud member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and now, and also proud member of now Narcotics Anonymous. And at the time, it's because, Narcotics Anonymous was still fairly new. It was still, gaining its sort of legs or roots, or whatever you want to call it. And that, his experience with the 12 steps and the traditions and the fellowship all came from, Alcoholics Anonymous. And for him, it was done in an incredibly grateful and respectful way. He paid homage to, the people from AA that helped start NA, and, them allowing us to adapt and take the traditions and the steps to form this new fellowship, and, their help in doing those things. So again, I don't quite understand. It just feels like there's animosity in that clarity statement to me. Maybe I'm reading a little deeper into it than its intention, but it feels like there's animosity.
That's interesting, because in the bulletin itself, it really goes in to talk about how people are using the stance of keeping to NA specific language to hate on AA. And the bulletin talks about how that's not the point of it. That's not the purpose of it. Please stop doing that. That's like, we should not be hating on AA. Like, we need everybody in the spirit of recovery to move forward to help as many people as possible. And so I don't know. I felt like the bulletin clarified pretty specifically that was, people should need to stop doing that kind of stuff with it. But it is important. And so one of the quotes I did pull out, quotes like this always make me question myself. It says, "At first glance, this seems minor, but our experience clearly shows that the full impact of the NA message is crippled by this subtle semantic confusion." And so when it tells me that, like, hey, it's possible at first glance, you're not going to think this is a big deal, but we're telling you from our experience that we found out it was. I say, well, shit, here I am sitting here thinking it's not a big deal. Are they talking to me? Like, did they see me coming? Right. Like, so I've tried to pull back and really look into, I'm like, is this a bigger deal than I think it is? I don't know. And I agree with what we've said today. Like, I agree that it shouldn't be of utmost importance, but I also think it's kind of serious to some extent. Maybe not serious like we should bash people and kick them out of our meetings, obviously, but okay. So let me say this. I was in a home group, and this was years back, and a friend of mine, Bobby, I love her to death. Still talk to her today, even though we don't live anywhere near each other anymore. We had the good old saying, if you have any drugs or paraphernalia, please take it outside and bury it before it buries you, or take it outside and get rid of it before you, trash it or stash it and come back in, or whatever we said about it at that time. And I made a motion in group conscience to remove that from our prologue. I said, this is stupid. I've been here years. Nobody ever takes their shit outside and comes back. Like, I wouldn't. I surely would not take it just doesn't make any sense. Why do we read this?
Right.
And her response was, we read it because we're serious about our recovery. She's like, it doesn't matter if people actually do it or not. The point is we're letting people know that this matters to us and we're serious about it. And that has stuck with me for, I don't know, Christ, probably 13 years now since she said it. And I'm like, it makes sense. It doesn't really matter what the reaction is or if people follow it. It's not harmful to read it to let people know that we are serious. Like, this matters to us. And so from that standpoint, I say, is it harmful to read the clarity statement and let people know that, like, this is what we're hoping for? We're hoping to only identify as addicts here because that's what we want to let people know, is that we're not drug specific. We'll help anybody that struggles with any drug problem.
So I would say, I guess, in a day and age of oversensitivity and, this total trying to never offend anybody, probably I would say yes, that I think it can be maybe not offensive, but it can be confusing and a little uh, off-putting to people coming out of treatment who have been in treatment and are all proud of, I got 30 days, drug and alcohol free, or, I'm an addict and alcoholic because I drink and do drugs. Like, they don't understand these like weird nuancy things that we as experienced members, feel so righteous to defend, like they don't get any of that shit. Like, and it the truth is, in my first 30, 60 or 90 days, I don't know that any of that mattered. I didn't have a fucking working knowledge or understanding of the steps and the traditions anyway. So, as I work and gain this understanding and knowledge of the traditions and of the steps, I incorporate them into my life, and then those words go away on their own. Like, I don't need someone to tell me how to identify. I don't need to tell someone, how they need to think and how they need to, see themselves, I guess. So yeah, I'd say it can be, I guess I'm looking at it from the perspective of anything that I can do to make people feel welcome and encouraged to come, and invite them to come just sit down, feel at home here, give us a shot, take this opportunity to give yourself a break. Like, I want it to be inviting and welcoming and warm and encouraging of people to come back. And I don't want to create an atmosphere where it feels like, well, we only want you if you're going to call yourself this. We only want you if your problem is this. We only want to hear from you if you identify this way. Like, I don't like that attitude.
So I'm just thinking here, and I'm pretty sure, I can't be totally certain because I forget a lot of shit, but I'm pretty sure that while I've heard this statement read many, many times at meetings, I have never seen anyone, because it never fails. As soon as you read it, somebody doesn't follow it during that meeting.
Yeah,
for sure.
Right. They share, yeah.
I have never heard anyone cut off, possibly, but I've never heard anybody cut off. Right? I've never heard a secretary or a home group member stand up and say, hey, we read the clarity statement. We don't fucking do that here. Like, you don't share anymore. Or nobody ever stopped anybody and corrected them. So it's like, I feel like we read this, and probably most people aren't fucking listening anyway, because, that's texting time while we're reading our prologue stuff. But I feel like we read it to tell people we're serious, and we're welcoming in the fact that we don't shut people down. We allow them to share. And then hopefully, an experienced member after the meeting is saying, hey, I heard you share, and then maybe getting into the point of why we don't do that at some point in time in their future conversation. But I don't think that was
going to be exactly my point. Is I've never heard anybody shut down, but I've definitely heard people cross share at them. After they shared, kind of cross sharing how, in this fellowship, we have one disease and we, one fellowship for one problem, whatever the fuck those stupid sayings are that we like to say when we're trying to correct people in our nice, subtle, unsubtle way.
Right.
And I've heard exactly what you just said, is some experienced member coming up to some fucking newcomer after the meeting to correct them on what they did wrong in the meeting. And both of those things, I think, are equally off-putting. If you're not that fucking person's sponsor and you're not, they're not asking for your opinion, I don't know that it's needed.
Well, and that's why I worded it the way I did. Like, I would hope you would just go up and start conversation and recognize that they're a newer member and they don't understand the tradition yet. And then at some point in time, maybe later that night, if you take them to a diner and you're having a good talk, maybe 3 weeks from now, if you're still talking to them, at some point in time in your future of your
Oh yeah,
conversation,
well that's
you would.
different. Yes.
Yeah, that's kind of why I said it that way. I don't think you should just run up and be like, "Hey, this is why you don't do that, motherfucker."
Well, I have heard that too. Like right after the meeting, someone goes up and says, "Hey, we don't identify here. There's another fellowship if you want to identify yourself as that." And I mean, I've seen those things happen. Like say during
Right.
a meeting in like a cross share or after a meeting, someone come up to someone and say, "We don't do that here at this fellowship. This is the way we do it." And to me, both of those are equally off-putting. It is very different if you've developed a rapport or relationship with somebody, and over time these ideas get talked about or expressed.
And
That's
so
yeah,
you bring up an interesting point, or at least it brings up an interesting point in my head. When we talked about special interest meetings, you said there wasn't the problem with the meetings themselves. And if people were, perverting them and telling other members they couldn't come because of their sex or gender, that was on the members' problem. That wasn't a problem with the special interest meetings themselves. And so that would tell me that there's not really a problem with the clarity statement being read itself. It's just the members perverting it to cross share or correct people after the meeting. It's not that, like, because we read the clarity statement, that's the problem. The problem is more in how the people are perverting the statement.
well, I guess I would agree. Yeah, it's the people's interpretation of that clarity statement that creates the problem. It's not the statement in and of itself. Unless, like, say, you can make the argument that the whole statement itself is a violation of our traditions. Which, if you go online enough, you'll feel there's a bunch of people that feel that it is for different reasons, that they feel like that clarity statement is actually a violation of our traditions. But I don't know that I necessarily agree with all that, but that argument is out there. I can point you to some pages if you want to go read boring nonsense.
Nah,
But
I already disagree.
yeah, it's definitely the interpretation and how that stuff is applied. But it's like if you read that as a statement in a meeting, it's almost like you're applying that is the viewpoint of the fellowship as a whole. Like that's the way that our fellowship looks at this. And I don't know that that's necessarily true.
I don't know. I'd have to say this almost, it feels a little like in one situation, you're expecting people to apply it right. I don't know. That just felt a little backwards to me. I would say I agree. It's not conference approved literature, right? Like, I don't think we all voted on saying it's okay, but because no home group's prologue is conference approved either, and they can say whatever the hell they want. That would to me state that it's not against traditions. I don't want to spend too much time on worrying about the special interest meetings discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say again, for me, most of the time, I don't look at things as black or white, or this is this way, and this needs to be applied in this way all the time. I'm going to dig myself out of this hole that you feel like I'm confused, but that's okay because again, it goes back to intention, and the intention becomes, what do I think is the action that's going to cause the least amount of harm, or how can I go through with offending the least amount of people, or harming the least amount of people, or not being so self-righteous on rules to where I have to, create a rule and then I have to stick with this rule, even if it's going to cause harm to someone else. So, how I apply these principles in my life, a lot of times, one of the very high values that I put on there is this offensive? Is this harmful? Is it off-putting to people? Like, if it is, I need to tread lightly before I proceed. Doesn't mean I'm going to immediately throw it out the window, because sometimes there are some things that I need to say to people that might be a little bit offensive, but I'm going to tread a little more lightly into that area. And like say, when we read a statement like the clarity statement in the beginning of a meeting, and I'm not even saying that meetings don't have the autonomy to do that. I mean, I guess you can read whatever you want to read in the beginning of your meeting. You don't have to read anything if you don't want to read anything. You can show up and say, this is an NA meeting. We talk about recovery for the 12 steps. The meeting's open if you want. You know what I mean? There's no guidelines to any of this format or any of that stuff. Obviously, we've sort of have a format that everybody sort of follows. Like say in my home group, we've chucked some of that out the window, partially for the sake of just chucking it out the window to just be like, we don't have to do what the fuck the rest of you people do. We can do whatever we want. So we don't read the traditions. You know, I don't know why that.
Thank God.
It originally started out with we only read like 2 of the readings, and slowly the other ones keep getting added back in over time. I don't know why, but we used to only read who is an addict and why are we here, and that's all we would read, and then we would get into the meeting. And the consensus back then was, you know, as people come around and they keep coming back, you know, they'll begin to understand, you know, what the program is and the traditions and all that stuff. We can get into all the nuancy bullshit later. You know, right now, like if you're a new person and you're here, welcome. This is what we do here. We're here to help people with addiction problem. All this other shit doesn't matter. Don't worry about what work you got to do and fucking getting a sponsor and reading all these books and fucking understanding all these traditions. Like none of that matters right now. Right now, just stop using drugs. Just come in, show up, and let us help you. And, you know, that's what we're here for. And so I think as we add these more readings and a little more rules and we start putting these conditions on it. Oh, and by the way, don't call yourself an alcoholic because then you're violating our traditions. And don't talk about being clean and sober because that's a little confusing. Like, wait, what? You know, wait.
So I'm totally in agreement with less readings, the better at the beginning of the meeting. So thank God for that. As soon as your home group cuts out more of them, I might come back. But I will say, I don't know. I think you're treading on something here about not being offensive. I agree, not being offensive. And I don't personally think reading the clarity statement before the meeting or during the beginning of the meeting is offensive in itself, right? I think some of the other ways you mentioned, people letting people know that they didn't listen to it, that's pretty offensive. The cross-sharing, the pulling people up after the meeting could be, you know, abrasive and not welcoming. But I don't think the statement read in itself, I think it's a clarifying statement. Like, this is what we do here, right? What about the meeting that says, if you've used today, please refrain from sharing? Because I hear that in quite a few meetings, and I definitely believe it's a useful clarification of we don't want you to confuse our message while you're high. That's going to offend some people too, but it's still necessary to be read because it's part of what, maybe it's not necessary, but it's still something I believe is useful to be read because it's a clarity of our program and our message. Like, what's your thoughts on that? Take that out too?
Yeah, I would get rid of that too.
Ooh.
Obviously, we've had it happen. We had just a few weeks ago, we had a guy come into our home group and talk all about methadone for fucking 10 minutes, you know, and it was awkward and weird, you know, because we don't, you know, that's not what we do here.
And nobody said anything.
We had to talk about it afterwards. And, you know, we were going to try to talk to them, like if they came back and, you know, we would try to talk to him maybe before the meeting or maybe because it wasn't like he hung out with everybody afterwards anyway. He came in during the meeting, shared what he had to share about being on his, you know, maintenance program and how great it was going for his life and all this other stuff. And then he left, you know, right after the meeting.
Right.
And so, you know, and it was awkward. It took us all aback. You know, none of us, we're not used to that, hearing that a lot. And so the next week, you know, a lot of us home group members get there early. We kind of were all there and we kind of talked about it. We said, hey, you know, this came up. This guy said he's coming back. You know, what do we fucking want to do about that? Do we want to like shut him down? Do we want to not shut him down? Do we want to, you know, whatever? And my opinion was, you know what? Let's just see if he keeps coming back. And then if he keeps coming back, we'll have a conversation before the meeting or after the meeting or whatever. But he never came back, you know. So it worked itself out to use, you know, the common in God's time. It worked itself out, and we didn't have to take action. But it wasn't that we weren't going to address it. But at the same time, you know, to me, like it's more important that we encourage that person to keep coming back to get the message of what Narcotics Anonymous is. And it's more important that we be welcoming and open to the addict who's suffering, than it is to drill home what the point of our program is, to someone that's new.
And so I guess for me, I would have to, lovingly disagree on this one for sure. And maybe in the atmosphere of your home group where there's 8 to 10 guys, you guys all have some years and some time in the program and you're more seasoned members and you all know that that's not what the NA program is about. Maybe it doesn't do that much harm in your meeting. Coming from some of the meetings I come from in the Baltimore area where it's full of recovery houses, you have 45 people in the meeting that have less than 6 months and are barely any understanding of NA or what the rules are or how we stay clean or how any of it works. Somebody being allowed to share about that for 10 minutes of the meeting could send 5 to 10 of those people out the door with the understanding of, damn, maybe methadone is all right and you still get to stay clean. And I don't know, right? I know I knew way less about NA when I first got here than I do now. So looking from my perspective now, I say that's crazy. Nobody would believe that. But early on, if that's what I'd have heard in my first meeting or two, I might have thought that was okay. And so I would say that person needs to be lovingly shut down immediately, right? And I think there are ways to compassionately and kindly and welcomingly set boundaries. It's kind of like the whole concept of how your kids will actually love you more if you set rules and boundaries for them than they will if you don't, because they love that kind of safety, right? It's the same thing. When I lovingly set a boundary, I'm actually inviting more connection with that person than I would be if I let them do the wrong thing or the thing that's contrary to being helpful. And so I would disagree. I would say we run more the risk of having newer members, at least in particular meetings where it's a high volume of new members frequently. You're running the risk of people going out and dying with misinformation more than you are the risk of offending one person. And so that I don't know. I definitely think I have a different stance on that.
So in general, then, do you feel like what one person may or may not share during a meeting can, I guess, contradict, overpower, overrun whatever the general consensus of the meeting is? Our home group obviously doesn't share that point of view. It's not like 5 members of the home group share that, or non-members of the home group for that matter, or that we exclude readings that make that point. And I guess where I'm going with that is we hear all kinds of people come in and say all kinds of shit all the time about what they read in the Bible and what they read out of this book and that book and, how they apply this step in their life, which, in my opinion is totally fucking wrong. How they're making amends before they've even done an 8th step or 9th step, with a sponsor, and they're making amends to their fucking dying grandmother in some terrible way. We hear all of those things. So, you know what I mean? I guess, to me, it's like, yeah, people say terrible shit in meetings all the time. And so, yes, we, as experienced members, and again, we, as a home group, I'll justify by saying we didn't think it was okay. We weren't like, oh, this is fine. Everybody was kind of like, whoa, wait a minute. You know what I mean? It doesn't happen here a lot. So we were caught a little bit off guard. And I wasn't actually there. So I only it happened to be a week I wasn't there. So I didn't hear exactly what this person said. I got the sort of cliff notes. But then they appointed me to be the one to try to talk to them later. So they're like, if they show up this week, you got to try to talk to them. Because I guess they figured I'd probably be someone who could try to do it in a loving and caring way. But the truth is, if I was there, I would not have shut them down. They would have shared whatever they were going to share. And then I might have shared afterwards if I hadn't shared already and said, my sort of, I hate to say cross sharing, but my, let's try to fucking correct this back to what Narcotics Anonymous is about, not just someone's vague opinions on what they think recovery is. But again, we get all kinds of bad information in meetings all the time. We have people identify themselves as all kinds of things all the time. And I don't think understanding the program or having things like the clarity statement, like the truth is the wording of the clarity statement, I agree with everything that it says 100%. I also would say that if I am on a service board or if I am involved in a service committee, like an H&I person, or, taking meetings into fellowships, into outside institutions, that is critically important for that role of service for Narcotics Anonymous. You know what I mean? Like if I'm taking a meeting into a jail or into a rehab, I want to make sure that my speakers are very clear about what the Narcotics Anonymous program is, what our fellowship is, what we represent, because that's the role of that. But in a general open meeting that's open to people that aren't even identifying themselves as alcoholics, I mean, yeah, aren't even identifying themselves as addicts per se. I don't know that stressing that point is the most important thing. I mean, I just think there's a better way to address those issues than to, put it into the format of a meeting or to make it, our job as a home group to police language.
Yeah, so many thoughts. I was thinking, I had to laugh in there. I just got this really awful picture of how people were making amends to their dead grandmothers, and it was I will spare you all what I was thinking for sure. It was pretty gross. So yeah, I don't know. I know in my old home group we read if you were on a maintenance program or have used today, welcome. We appreciate that you're here. We love it. We welcome you with open arms, but we ask that you refrain from sharing today. And if you do share, and one of the first things you say is, I used today in some way, shape, or form, we will ask you to stop. Like that's just part of our rules. And I think at that home group where there is 55 people every week, and most have less than 6 months, and there's probably on any given week 15 members I've never seen before, which means they've come around in the last 6 days. I think it's our responsibility to do that. Yeah, I agree. People share nonsense all the time, but it's not, I don't, maybe it is life-threatening. I don't know. It doesn't seem as life-threatening nonsense. Like these people could go out after the meeting tonight and decide that they can get on maintenance tomorrow, so let me use one more time. Like to me, that seems pretty immediate and urgent. If you're making amends to grandmas in the wrong way, that might bring you some shame and guilt that makes you want to use one day, but it doesn't seem as urgent. And I guess that's like really warping. Like we have a very clear definition of what clean is. Well, seemingly clear. It really isn't that clear in the long run, but it seems clear early on.
See, I'm holding my pinky because I got a point to make exactly about that.
So I think it's important to that we follow whatever guidelines our home group has established, and that one to me is an important one in an area where you're constantly dealing with new people who could be confused about that, right? In your home group, it's probably not that big of a deal. I don't think anybody's going to be confused about, what NA means about being clean and what the requirements for membership are, or what they need to do to, keep thriving in their life. At my old home group, I think that was an important thing, and people did need to be shut down.
Yeah, and that's what's really awesome about the autonomy of the program. And see, that's exactly why I think the less, quote unquote rules and the less guidelines and the less structure we try to put on these things as a fellowship, the better. The home groups, and the individual groups get to decide how they can best serve their immediate community based on their experience. And like say in the case of something like getting back to the clarity statement, I mean, in an area like say out in bumfuck nowhere, the middle of Utah, we've had the same experience in Arizona, we had the same experience up in Montana, up in the mountains in Montana. Was the same. Like there wasn't enough for multiple fellowships and you couldn't go to all these places. Like in those areas, that clarity statement really could go out the window because, you know, they don't have the amount of resources that we have in other areas. So I think when we get into trying to adopt some of these principles or policies, you know, and like push them out on this fellowship as a whole mentality and get away from basically just the guidelines of the traditions, you know, we start getting into some really hairy areas.
Okay. No, and I can totally understand that. So just some kind of wrap up questions. Is it okay for AA to have the belief you should not share or not call yourself an addict, not share about drugs? Is it okay for them to believe that is right for their meetings? Do you think that's cool for them, but not for us? I guess is what I'm asking.
Oh no, I don't. So so I guess I'll answer your question this way. When I go to any other outside fellowship, I try to respect their traditions and identify myself as the way that they want me to. With that being said, if I went in and called myself an addict or alcoholic, or accidentally called myself an addict, or accidentally said clean instead of sober, and some asshole came up and yelled at me, I would not feel like he was representative of the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous as I know it, or of, I do know, you know, again, not as close around here, but in other areas, I have been, you know, closer with people in Alcoholics Anonymous who have an experience, you know, in that fellowship that view a lot of that a different way. So if I saw someone policing that in the way that I see it policed in NA, that guy's an asshole. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
Well, my understanding has always been that if you start talking in the majority, and this could be a very wrong misunderstanding, but my understanding was in the majority of AA meetings, if you started talking about drugs, they just stopped you right there in the middle of the meeting. They cut you off and said, "This is
that's
not
not been my experience, and I've been to, I wouldn't say a lot of AA meetings, but I've been to at least a couple dozen. And no one's ever shut me down for using the wrong language. And again, I try not to, but I have. And I've never been in a meeting where I have heard someone who's a, you know, alcoholic and addict be shut down. You know,
So
it's something I've seen, but I don't have that much experience in that fellowship either. I
okay.
mean, I'm sure it happens. I would bet 100% it happens.
I'm curious if a new person who had trouble with drugs other than alcohol walked into a AA meeting because that's what they found, whatever, and started sharing about their drug use. Is it okay? Would you think it would be okay for AA as a fellowship to believe they should not be talking there because that has nothing to do with alcoholism?
So I've talked to some people that are, I would say, in that position. And at least one guy in particular who I do know quite well, because he's an interesting example, because here's a guy who he has a lot of time now. I still keep in touch with him vaguely. For the longest time, he went to both fellowships, went to AA and to NA. Shouldn't say here. He went to AA and to NA. And at times, people had asked him to go share as part of an H&I, you know, service, to go into to speak at rehabs on behalf of Narcotics Anonymous, and I didn't feel like that was right. I felt like that wasn't, you know, he was going to both fellowships, and he has a very, what I would call a mixed message, if you're getting into the languaging of it, that he has a very mixed message, and that I don't think that he should be speaking in that capacity as a member of Narcotics Anonymous. You know what I mean? Like it seemed very blurred. Now I will tell you what, anyway, knowing that guy, and he was a member of my home group for a long time and has really good recovery. I mean, his message is great. If you heard him share, it's a great message. That's why people would ask him to go into treatment, because he has this great, strong, powerful message. But he had explained to me, almost similar to what we had talked about earlier, what happened to him was he went there for a lot of time, identified his drug problem and identified all that, and then just got hooked in with some people that helped him adjust the way that he looked at that, adjust the way that he uses language, and then encouraged him to come to NA for his drug problem, you know, which is why he went to both for a long time. He went to AA for what, because he liked the meetings. Now in his version, the program was the same, take out those words, you know what I mean? Like that he looked at the AA program as being all encompassing, that it did focus on all these other areas, but you identified it a certain way and applied it in the meeting in that way for the unity aspect, but that those principles were, in all areas of your life, that you didn't just apply them to just alcohol, that program applied to all areas of your life. Their 12 step is the same as ours. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to addicts and practice these principles in all areas of our affairs. So why they identify, and this is, I'm paraphrasing here, but why they identify, alcohol specific in the first step for the sake of their meetings and their fellowship, you can take those same principles and apply them in all areas of your life to a drug problem, to a gambling problem, to a sex addiction problem, and get the same outcome. But he was encouraged to go to different fellowship. So he identified as an alcoholic and clean, or I guess sober, in those meetings, and identified another way when he came to our meetings. And, I don't know, like I say, it worked for him. I love the guy. He's got a great message. He's still someone I see periodically, I keep in touch with, and I think he can help a lot of people with that experience.
I think it's definitely area specific too. I've heard that maybe the Bel Air area is pretty universal, where more people who use drugs do go to AA, but then there's some other areas, like probably the Baltimore area, where they're pretty thorough on, this is what you need to talk about if you're in here, because this is our problem. I don't know. I'm still, I can't say I'm completely sold. I get being compassionate and understanding to people. I can't say I'm completely sold on not finding this to be important. I think if a alcoholic walked into an AA meeting where everyone only talked about drug use, and they didn't find the help they needed because they compared out because of that, I would think AA had failed its purpose. And so I would say it's important for these fellowships to kind of have specific language for their fellowship that, hits the person that needs it, that they can compare in. But I do understand, some of your points today too. So back to Caroline's question, what about if you're super respectful, you follow whatever fellowship's language, you're going into, can you share in another fellowship's meeting? Now, I would say, just to clarify, I'm not talking about walking in. I've been to, an AA anniversary where I showed in, popped up. I might have shared for a couple minutes, did my best, like you said, to respect their language and what they're talking about there. I'm talking about probably being like the lead speaker for the meeting.
I personally wouldn't do it, if it was me, but again, I don't know. I mean, even now, was that the guy that I referred to earlier, was that, wrong to ask him to go into a recovery place as a representative of a fellowship he wasn't solely committed to? I don't know. He's got a great message. If he encouraged people to come to meetings and get clean in that treatment center, then more power to him. I mean, I think in his case, I would say he did less harm than good. So, who am I to judge? But I wouldn't go to another fellowship and be a speaker in that sense. I would decline. I mean, I would, and I'd just say, I don't feel like I have the experience to come adequately represent your group.
No, I would agree. If somebody from AA asked me to share a specifically AA meeting, I would definitely have to decline because I don't have that experience. But I'm curious, when you talk about this guy, if he was doing both fellowships, why do you feel like his message would have been unclear? He was an NA member, right?
Well, so he had, when he came to the NA fellowship, I think he had 6 or 7 years in the other fellowship and had only been coming to our meeting for a shorter amount of time. If you're really not involved with our service structure or haven't formally worked NA 12 steps with an NA sponsor, are you really? And of course, we have all those people do that anyway, I guess. Like we have people go speak in facilities that probably haven't even finished the first 3 steps. But, I have certain criteria that I have, whatever deemed what qualifies someone to be a speaker for, if I was a panel leader for a H&I commitment, that's backfired on me too. So I don't know. I had a guy with 20 some years who had worked, the steps a couple times over, and I took him into a facility, and man, he dropped so many F-bombs and his language was terrible. And he talked a ton about using, and it took me aback because I had an expectation, without being really clear up front. Anyway.
Hey, I drop a lot of F-bombs. I think that's spiritual.
Yeah, well, it depends on the facility. If the facility asks you not to, which we have some of those. Yeah.
I definitely, that goes back to like if somebody calls me and says, "Hey, can you come share my meeting?" It's a meeting where we don't use profanity. I'd probably say, "Well, why the fuck you asking me?" That's part of my story.
And again, I don't necessarily disagree with the spirit or the intention of the clarity statement. I think if that was, written in a book somewhere, the fellowship had some review and input on that whole idea and concept. Like you could make that a whole chapter in a fucking piece of literature or a pamphlet. And I personally would like to see it reviewed and input by the fellowship as a whole, to get a more spiritual and what I feel like is spiritual and loving approach to it. But I just don't know that, again, I'm for less rules, less guidelines, less, let's get everybody into line so that we're all, I don't think that the fellowship works that way. I think it works best when it's left open and free and with the general structure of the 12 traditions. And I don't know that anything, I feel like the points that people make to stress the need for the clarity statement are debatable. It's not like a clear cut, like if you call yourself an alcoholic, you're in clear violation of tradition 1. Like, I don't think so. I don't see it that way at all,
So I would say, no, yeah, I'm with you. I would say I would not think it's okay to have a speaker from a different program in my program, right? That's my take on it. I don't think that's okay. They don't have experience with working my program. And that's the point of what you're sharing, as far as I understand it. Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, I have heard people in home groups throughout the years of mine that, we've gotten a speaker and the speaker gets up and shares and has not worked a step and has like 4 months clean and shares a fucking tragic mess. Yeah. And would I have rather heard a speaker from another fellowship who could disguise their language? Absolutely. That would have been way better than that for my life. And so I guess what I would say is, if you have the ability and the practice and you can share so that I would never know you were from another fellowship, fuck it, do it.
Yeah, that's how, that's kind of how I look at it too. And again, most of this I apply to myself more than I ever look at it as how I'm going to enforce it. But if I were going to say I was going to, enforce this, my home group's not a speaker meeting, but even if it was, I don't know that I would ever have a speaker that was from another fellowship. And I would probably, just me personally, would probably even struggle a little bit with someone that I knew went to multiple fellowships. That's just me. And
that's confusing to me.
Yeah. And it would be situational. It wouldn't be, if you ever went to any other fellowship, you can't. I wouldn't approach it like that. But I would say, if you had 10 years in another fellowship and you've been in this fellowship for, let's say, a year or 2 years or 3 years, but you didn't have an NA sponsor, or you hadn't worked NA steps, or you hadn't really done any service in NA, again, how well could you carry a message of Narcotics Anonymous as a speaker representing Narcotics Anonymous?
I swear to God, I never understand what the hell you're going to say. I never know where you're coming from. You spent this whole podcast telling me how inclusive and open we should be with these other things, and then I don't know. I feel like that guy's a member. He said he's a member. He's been coming for a year. Fuck it, he's a member. Like we
Yeah,
can
so
share.
that's the difference. I would never discourage him from coming to my home group, from sharing in my home group, but I wouldn't ask him to be a speaker. You
That's
know what I mean?
hilarious.
Like
That's
I would still,
hilarious.
I mean, I would encourage people that are using. If you're fucking high, keep coming, man. Come every week. Come fucking high. Come drunk. I don't care. I'll sit next to you. We'll fucking chat it up while you're drunk. I'll make fun of you. That's fine. Keep coming. I want you to have a good time. I want you to be here. You deserve to be here. You belong here. But I'm not going to ask you to sit at the fucking table and share your experience with me because I don't need that experience. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I think we have to, as a fellowship, I want our fellowship to be encouraging and open. I want, when we have events, I would encourage you to come to events. Oh, come to the NA picnic, come to the fucking NA softball, come to all the NA stuff. You don't have to be clean. You don't have to have a sponsor. You don't have to work steps. Come to this stuff, see what we're about, get a taste of what this thing of recovery is. But I don't think because I encourage people to come, or I think they should come, that they are a representative of the fellowship, if that makes sense.
Super interesting. Super interesting. So, are there pure alcoholics anymore? Is that still really a thing? Like, I feel like almost every alcoholic I know did a pill here or there, or engaged in something. I guess maybe not all of them.
I mean, that's like saying, are there any real drug addicts? Like as when we identify ourselves as so. And I had hinted on this a little bit earlier, but it's like in NA, we do the little, back and forth. Like we want to say our identification as addicts is all inclusive, but we don't really encourage people to come in and talk about their sex addiction. I've heard people get sort of shut down for sharing about, even smoking, sex addiction, gambling, any of these outside things, are considered outside issues for Narcotics Anonymous. And those aren't what we're here for. We have a very clear, we don't like to say that our fellowship is specifically about drug addiction, but we are specifically about drug addiction. That's what we are. Our identification as addicts is not all inclusive. It's all inclusive as long as you're a drug addict. That's the truth of it.
I think it needs to be.
Yeah, and I do too, and I don't see a problem with that. I think, but let's own that shit. Let's not.
Oh, okay.
Like, let's not act like we're one on one hand, one fellowship that fucking for all diseases and all that stuff. But then, well, yeah, but you can't share about your other diseases in here. You got to keep that shit out. No, let's, we are about, and again, I think just like the alcoholics, I think that's what keeps us on point. We fucking identify. We are about I keep saying we. Narcotics Anonymous is about, addiction to drugs and mind altering, substances. And if we get off of that, we lose our point of focus. We lose our unity. We lose our identification, as a fellowship.
So I guess this leads me to the question, since there's so much debate about this, would we be better served by a one world recovery program? Would that be more useful and get rid of all of these issues we're talking about with recovery language and what you can and can't say? Or would that be more harmful in the sense that people who wanted to get a day clean off of drugs wouldn't hear what they needed to hear in every meeting?
I don't know that one would be more harmful. I just don't. So this gets sort of back to something we had talked about. We had texted back and forth a little bit about when we were talking about this subject. So whether the program is a success or not, we had kind of talked back and forth about if someone relapses, does that mean the program doesn't work and that sort of thing. And my idea of recovery is I have nothing against every 12-step, non-12-step, non-abstinence-based, whatever kind of recovery programs are out there. To me personally, the more the better. We can have an AA, we can have a CDA, we can have an SLA, we can have a, whatever, every A there is under the sun. The more the better, because to me, you're casting a broader net and you're going to get more people engaged in the process of recovery at a place that they can identify. So would it hurt to have a one addict recovery fellowship? I don't think so. I think it would be great. I'd probably stay where I'm at, because I'm
Right.
happy and I'm getting my needs met. But I would encourage and support and help, encourage people that I thought could benefit from that to go there. And I think it would be incredibly useful.
All right. I don't know that I got any more. I definitely think we've done my job of beating this one, digging it up, beating it a couple more times. You got anything else you want to input into it?
No, I think I'm good. Like I say, I hate the clarity statement being read in me. I'm gonna always be in a group where we say less readings, less rules. Let's.
I'm for less readings right now. I'm for less readings. You want to read what is NA and why are we here? Beautiful. That sounds great. That explains enough of it to get us to the point. But I'm not in any way against the clarity statement. I don't think it in itself is offensive or rude. I think it's just a statement of clarity. And I don't think it asks. I don't think it's offensive by itself, right? Some of the actions people have, I mean, that's like saying the Bible isn't really offensive, but people do a whole lot of cruddy shit in the name of the Bible, right? Like, that doesn't mean we should get rid of the Bible. I feel the same way about the clarity statement. If your group wants to read it, fuck it, read it. Like, it does explain something. It might not be taken to heart or used. Like, people are definitely going to call themselves addicts and alcoholics in your meeting and clean and sober, but fuck it, read it anyway.
Yeah, maybe that's what I'll do from now on. If they read the clarity statement, I'm an addict and alcoholic.
Oh God, I want to be in these meetings.
Just for fun. Just for fun. No,
I want to hear the cross shares.
The clarity statement in and of itself is offensive. I actually agree with the verbiage of it is correct. I agree with all that. It's the spirit of it or the way that it seems to get interpreted that bugs me. So that's my issue with it, really. So that's it.
I think I'm just going to correct people who live by the clarity statement every time they call themselves dope fiends and crackheads from now on, and be like, whoa, you are also wrong, my friend.
Let me read you this clarity statement.
Right.
I include the part where it talks about dope fiends from the bulletin because they never put that part.
No. All right. Well, I guess that's all we got for today. I hope everybody has a good week, and we will see you again next week.